We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisade's Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is David Morgan, founder of the Morgan Report. How are you today, David?
I'm doing okay, Tom. Thanks.
It's good to have you back. You know, you and I have done quite a few Twitter Spaces over the last couple of months here, and I'm very grateful to always have your input for that. But you know, it's been a little while since you and I have been able to sit down and kind of talk through, you know, some of the issues that you and I see as real concerns for like the average person. So one of the biggest concerns I think that I'd like to touch on with you today is kind of how do we get to a central bank digital currency? And is it possible that, you know, the instability that the average person has witnessed, let's say in the crypto cycles here, will make them more accepting of adopting a central bank version that, you know, has this guise of stability of being backed by these larger entities?
All right. Well, there's a bit to unpack there. One is how do we get there? And of course, that's debatable, but we'll go into that next. But the second part is easy for me to answer. And that is, as the crypto world has more and more questions surrounding it, what's the security, what isn't, these financing houses go down, even stable coins that aren't so stable, what's the real story behind Tether? And just if I could break in here, Tom, and I know you'll let me, I took a look at the opposite side of the coin on Bitcoin. Been over a year now. I call it the Crypto Conspiracy Series. Mm-hmm. And there's 30 podcasts in that. So it wasn't like a weekend event. I looked deepest, had it all verified by some of the best people in the industry. Kurt Wuckert being one of them, who's an archivist in Bitcoin, straight shooter, tells it like it is. Is it running for popularity contest or something that sounds good? He's after the truth.
David, that's all on your YouTube channel though, right? Correct.
So in summary, Tom, what you alluded to is correct. The nausea around the crypto space is going to make it a lot easier for the political class, the authority figures, the banksters to come in and say, hey, look, there's all these problems. This was a security, this isn't, and on and go. They have a big, list and arm's length. And they'll say, check this, and this. We got a problem, we have a solution. Solution is it's got to be centralized. We got to have control. Everybody knows where it is. It's transparent, blah, blah, blah. And they'll sell the public. They won't sell you and I this idea that, geez, it's a great idea, but it needs to be perfected. And the only way to perfect it is to be a central bank digital currency. So that was your second question. The first one we can pick at as we go along. But coming back to the crypto conspiracy, there's a very big tie between Jeffrey Epstein, JP Morgan, and the whole crypto world, especially Bitcoin. Now, this is something that your maximalists will never touch. It's just they totally, completely, 100% ignore it. But you can't ignore a fact. You can ignore it, but you can't ignore the consequences of that fact. Mm-hmm. And the consequences of that fact was, Jamie Dimon would dispose relative to his banking relationship with Epstein. And I know we're kind of down a rabbit hole. I don't want to go too far off your main beat here, but I think it's important for people to know that maybe the granddaddy of them all might have been done in the most altruistic methods available, where one human or a group sat down and said, let's make our own frickin' money. Let's get away from bankers' control. And here's how we're going to do it. That could have been the intent. I have no way to know that. What I do know is that is not where we're at in the Bitcoin world now. In fact, it's probably one of the more corrupted situations. And I know Bitcoiners will hate me for it, and that's okay. And that part's opinion. And the reason I have that opinion is because the banksters at large, largely MasterCard, has taken over the lion's share of the positions in Bitcoin. It's not a money for the people, folks. It's a money for the whales. It's a money for the bankers again. That's what's happening. So back to you, Tom.
So, David, as we've seen the banking system instability here, in recent memory, is this also going to be sold as an advantage over, let's say, traditional banks. You know, the banking failures that we've seen, this could be, you know, centralizing everything, bringing it all under one roof could be looked at as or sold as a real positive, could it not?
Oh, it will be. That's exactly right. Of course, when you have central control of something, it's not a good thing. You have the anti-fragile meme when you have a diversified system. You know, I mean, like, you know, you don't know my aircraft background exactly, but I've talked about it on many podcasts. And, you know, the reason you have 4 hydraulic systems on the B-1 bomber is if 3 go out, you still have 1, right? Mm-hmm. You would need that redundancy. It's the same thing in the financial world. But yet, as it becomes more and more centralized, the more problems could take place. I mean, just think if you had one bank and the power switch going into that one bank got turned off and you turned off the power, then the whole entire banking system's down. Whereas if you had 4,600 branches like we do now, and one goes down, you've still got 4,599 that are still there. So I do believe that there's a lot more to discuss here, and we did some off air. One of the things that I started again was, looking at what Ayn Rand says, check your premises. So one of my premises I had to recheck, and that was, what is the actual process that needs to be enacted in order for a CBDC to even take place? Mm-hmm. And as you know, I put that on my Twitter feed. So I actually put up the rule off of the .gov website for the United States. And I didn't embellish it. I just put it up there. People can interpret it their own way, the way I read it, without adding or subtracting to the words on the paper, where that there would have to be some political move by the House of Representatives in order to even have a CBDC. And then if you look at the pushback we're getting already, where there's different states in the union here, Tom, that don't want anything to do with the CBDC. Mm-hmm. DeSantis had made sounds about that. The Cato Institute, which I support, did a paper, I just read it a couple days ago, on putting up resistance against the CBDC. But back to your point, they'll make it sound as if it's the only way out. And the bankers are in a fix that we've talked about before. They must start a new financial system, and they must start it fairly soon, because the old one is failing miserably. Now, is a failure by design? I would say yes. Any banker that really knows how compounding interest works understands it's destined to fail. It's destined to fail from the first time you put out interest that doesn't exist. You have to create more money. That's why, as the late, great Richard Russell said, inflate or die. If you don't expand the money supply, you never get the extra money to pay the interest on the debt. So the competition to the establishment is somewhat cryptocurrencies, obviously gold and silver-backed cryptos, plain old gold and silver. And of course, there's other offshoots. There's barter clubs. There's trading at your neighborhood flea market. I mean, there's other things you can do. But on the whole, everybody's pretty much tied to the banking system, especially when it comes to needs of life, meaning utilities. You have to be tied to a government bank of some type. Mortgages, in most cases, you get a private mortgage, but they're rare, but you could. Any public service, or what's considered public service, like a telephone, cell phone, utility bill, water hookup, trash collection, anything that's pretty much imperative for you and I, you would have to have a relationship with an approved entity in order to conduct your basics of life. And it's designed that way. It's designed that way so no one can escape. One of the biggest problems the bankers have currently is that there's 2 billion unbanked people. If they get everybody's DNA as their identification, doesn't matter if you've got 12 cents or 12 million bucks, you're in the system. And that's exactly what they want. So we need to see how much more pushback there is. What I'm really looking for, Tom, is like the Hegelian dialectic, where plan A, plan B, we synthesize into plan C, and we've got what we wanted all along. I don't quite see it that way yet. And I may have missed something, but they definitely want their control. They don't want to lose it. They want it now, but they really don't seem to know how to implement it.
You don't think they know how to implement it?
I don't. I think that, as I just said, going to Congress, if they have to get approval by Congress. Now, let me put a caveat on that. Does David Morgan think that the bankers at large are going to follow anything at law anymore? No, I don't. But having said that, in the books, it looks like they have to get congressional approval to put out a CBDC. So how are they going to implement it? Well, if you put out a CBDC for the U.S., how do you integrate that with the one that really is up and running perfectly, and that's the Chinese CBDC? I mean, you've got 400 million people on that, bigger than the population of the United States, already is on a cashless system. Everything's run off their phone. Everything that they buy is known at point of sale. And that's kind of the standard. I mean, if you want to do a real, I'll call it a nasty thought experiment, and the whole system comes down, and the only thing up and running is the Chinese CBDC, and everybody's got to integrate into that, there is a way to do it philosophically. And I chose my word carefully, Tom, because saying something and doing something are two different things.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you is kind of how far down we are the road to getting a CBDC, let's say in the US. Are there examples, let's say, in the world ready for use, like the one already being released by the IMF, for example?
Yeah, I can't answer that because I don't know, but I will give you a comment. What's interesting in the financial realm is how cumbersome the system is. I mean, these wire transfers are ridiculous. They take days, sometimes weeks. They should take milliseconds. But on point, when there is a crisis, you could see actions take really, really quickly. If you go to what happened under Paulson, Secretary of the Treasury, we had the financial crisis, we still refer to it as that. He wrote it out on, I think, 2 or 3 pieces of paper, had all the major money center banks sign it, whether they wanted to or not. They're basically verbally threatened. They had to go along with it. Mm-hmm. And that thing was enacted like that. So my point is that in a crisis situation, you could see a CBDC enacted probably pretty quickly. We know that the Fed, I want to say Fed coin, but it's not. It happens in July, so that's a month away. And the groundwork is there because these bankers all work together. In fact, the bankers basically run the governments of the world. So there is a ISO 222. And this, I think, goes beyond the BRICS, because we hear so much on shows like yours about the BRICS are going to extradite themselves from the dollar, and they're going to go on a gold standard or oil and gold, and they've got 60% of the world's resources. And I mean, all that stuff makes sense, and it sounds great. But if you look at ISO 222, it's called a single standardization approach, methodology, process, repository to be used by all financial standards initiatives. Well, that covers everything. That covers cashless society, it covers CBDC, it covers interbank transfers, it covers the BRICS, it covers doing away with the SWIFT or changing the SWIFT, anything to do with all financial standards initiatives. And guess who signed on to that? The BRICS. So you have to really question these things quite deeply. And look, I do deep dives on some stuff, and I do cursory moves on everything. You only have so much time. And it's basically based on interest. And my interest hasn't been silver, although it's primarily something I love and studied and could talk a great deal about. My real interest has been what in the hell is wrong with the monetary system? Mm-hmm. And what can I do as an individual and wake up others to make something wrong right? And my whole life, I've witnessed things get worse and worse and worse in the financial realm, and more power has been taken away from the people, and less freedom has been allowed to the people, you could say. And we're at a threshold now, Tom, where it's now or never. I mean, if this ISO 222 gets implemented, it's already been signed into, and they're able to 3 months from now, go from the FedNow, I think it's called FedNow, into as a trial balloon for the Fed coin. Well, it's not working perfectly, but it works for all the major banks. The regional banks will come in within 6 months. You've got a 6-month window to do with your cash as you see fit. You don't have to turn it in. You don't have to report it. You just have to be rid of it in 6 months. I'm thinking all this stuff at the top of my head, but governments are lazy and they're reactive. They don't really come up with much on their own. So I think they could be a situation where the more pressure that's on them to make something work, the faster it will happen. So I kind of contradicted myself when I said that, I don't think it's going to be implemented that easily. And I still adhere to that. Mm-hmm. I think whenever you're in a field, especially as complex as the financial system, there's so many intermediaries now that want their slice of the pie, that their whole existence depends on a trade, not whether it goes up or down, not whether it benefits society or not whether it adds anything to the social fabric. The whole point is that somebody made a trade. And this is very sick. In a very stable financial system, something like 4% of the populace work is revolved around the financial structure. And we're at 40%. So we're at like 10 times what we should be for an honest money system, where I know a dollar today is going to be worth the same in 30 years as it is today because we have a sound financial system. So I probably went on a bit of a tangent, but I'm really very concerned and see it going the wrong way. I do see some resistance. And let me turn it over to you, see what else you've got. And also I want to brainstorm with you before we stop on what we can do as individuals to, throw a wrench or two into the gears, because there are things we can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I want to get to. But, I think there's some nuance to understand about the Fed coin. As I understood it at this point, it is mostly for the banks to be able to trade with each other. And it is not really a retail product at this point, right?
Correct. It's FedNow. I got the name right. And you're exactly correct. But I know how these things usually work. And as I said before, it's a trial balloon. So they'll do it at a cursory level and move it on down and then get it to perhaps individual accounts. Don't know that for sure. What I do know is the pressure's on because they're going to do it in July. Mm-hmm. Very interesting to see what the reports back read like. Mm-hmm. Of course, who knows what you read anymore, if it's true or not. But regardless, we will get some feedback. And I would say there's no doubt in my mind that the Chinese system is the one that works the best. It's probably the one coveted by the bankers at large. And it probably will be a template for other countries.
And very likely that's because they have the most amount of experience with it already, right?
Exactly.
So, David, one of my other thoughts or let's say arguments against this implementation of a CBDC is let's say the efficiency that government works with. When we see programs extended, like, for example, the COVID relief payments, there were dead people getting checks, there were people getting two checks. When we see the efficiency that they can implement any kind of programs with, never mind the complexity of a digital type currency, do you see that as a major obstacle against being able to actually, force something like a digital currency through the cracks when it needs to be?
Yes, but governments are very good at, manipulating the economic conditions to get compliance. And so, starve people out. You don't let them, do certain social activities or that type of thing. And that, of course, could be one of the major issues going forward. But I do think that it's going to happen. Whether it comes in smoothly or not, I think it will be very rough at the edges. I don't think it's going to be implemented very easily at all. There'll be a lot of resistance.
So, David, one of the other, let's say the other sides of this that we need to talk about that I think is really important, again, for the average person that is obviously aware of this, is how we can kind of, sidestep some of that. I don't think it's going to be possible to completely sidestep it, but, how do we keep assets out of that system or, stay somewhat independent from being forced into or completely into that type of system?
Well, there's a few things. One is to use cash as much as possible. One of the people leading the charge there is Catherine Austin Fitts of Solari. She's advocated, I think, Cash Fridays for a very long time. And it's illegal to not take cash in the US, but yet the stores say, well, we're private enterprises. We don't have to adhere to the government rules. We're private. And there's a case to be made for that. But that's the easiest and best. The other one that sounds corny, especially coming from me, is to raise your voice, because I have almost zero faith in the political class, maybe 0.0001%. Nonetheless, if you do email, which is not very effective, write letters, which are not very effective, but if you phone and you jam the phone lines and you tell these Congress critters here or your parliament up there that they don't want anything to do with the CBDC, and they get, 500% increase in calls for the next month, someone's going to wake up. Now, will that change legislation or cause them to change their vote? Don't know. What it does do is it sends a clear message. So that's another way.
Well,
another thing that
if I can just add something there, if I can add something there quick, David, at the end of the day, they're people too, right? They're not necessarily aware of, people's reaction and or the risk that some people see as this poses to the average person. So, the more that we can highlight that to any of these representatives, the more it makes them think and or research about it, right?
Right. Another one that I'm still working on, and that's it's asset-backed cryptocurrencies. And most people that have listened to me or your show know I'm an ambassador for the LODE project. It's LODE.ONE if you're interested. And we've gotten several questions that were the same question. Well, how do we know if we're up and running and we're peer-to-peer and I'm buying everything with the LODE token or the LODE coins, actually, the AGX and AUX, that the government won't come in and put the big kibosh on it? Mm-hmm. The answer is there isn't. It could happen. Will it happen? That's the real question. And I currently think no. I think that it's so under the radar and something that they don't even want to address that you can have several, and there's more than ours by far, that have gold and silver backed cryptocurrencies that are fairly anonymous. And there's nothing really anonymous out there, believe me. I won't go into why. But that would be something as an adjunct to the system at large. So it does the one thing for silver especially, and that puts it back into a monetary platform. It's not just a stacker mentality anymore, it's actual utilization. Mm-hmm. And the more utilization you have in anything, the better the adaption, the faster you can grow it. And the adaption in a cell phone technology that goes from mine to mobile, where you go from concentrate, gets refined, put into the LBMA stack as an example, and that unit is divided up many, many times into grams and grains, gold and silver, and utilized for people in Mexico, Indonesia, South America, to be able to transact peer-to-peer for their phone bill, for their groceries, for transportation, communication, or what have you. So there's a big possibility there where that could explode exponentially and still be under the radar of the authorities because it's only gold and silver. And who cares about those gold and silver nuts anyway, until the adoption is so strong that they find out that it is being. So there's that. The last one, I think, has to do with the biggest picture of all. And that is something I was asked years ago when I not only got into the honest money movement, as we used to call it, but my motivation. And one of my mentors at the time, and was much younger than I am now, and he just asked me one simple question that I never forgot. He asked me, what price freedom? And that resonated with me quite deeply because white race, black race, doesn't matter. Of course, some people make it matter, but when you go back to the founding fathers, basic initiative to give up everything that they had, their fortunes, for an ideal, the ideal of freedom, and they're willing to sacrifice everything for that. Someone that can understand that at a deeper level can realize that's where we're really at. I mean, CBDC, yes, we had a good discussion, hopefully enlighten some people, get them to look up this ISO 222, look up, the BRICS really going against the dollar, or is it a big ruse? What's the ultimate plan look like? And all this is conjecture on our part, yours and mine. But the biggest part is this freedom. And unless you're willing to opt out, so let's take it on a personal level. If you're willing to opt out and not take the CBDC, and at that point you're not able to get government, services. You can't get a cell phone, and maybe you could, but let's just say you couldn't get a cell phone, you couldn't get utilities, you couldn't get water, and you couldn't get trash service. You still could live, and you can still do without all those things. Now, it's very difficult, but it's being accomplished every day. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's more and more people that are in the off-grid movement daily than before, and it's really, and I hate to say it because it sounds maybe not compassionate enough, and I am a compassionate person, but you also see it in the homeless. I mean, these are people that are off-grid. They had a nice home and a great job and 2 cars, and everything was fine, and here it is, 2 years after the illness, and they can't make ends meet. They're living in a tent somewhere. And I'm not happy to report that, believe me, but it's the sign of the times. And at the end of all these great inflations, there's huge disturbances throughout the whole social structure at questions, things that are very insignificant. Now, again, I'll get some pushback, but when it comes to the choice between what price freedom and whether or not you're using the correct pronoun, when you're out there starving to death, believe me, the pronoun doesn't matter very much. And the reason why am I not free to go hunt in my own backyard anymore? That comes to the fore. Like, wait a minute, I'm self-sufficient or self-sufficient enough, and you're telling me I can't grow my own food? Who gave you that right to control my life that far that I can't even exist? Which is basically the essence of that. So again, I probably went down the rabbit hole, but it really, really burns me, because if there's one thing that my essence is, it's freedom. If we don't have freedom, what the hell do we have? Doesn't matter how much financial freedom. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, you go back, I've said this before, Tom, and thanks for being a good listener, but, you go back 30 years and, I was all about financial freedom. If I had enough loot, I could, start a foundation, give out to others, work for, I forget the name of it. My first book, I donated to it, but it's for the underprivileged for housing, and all this stuff. But now it doesn't matter. You could be the richest man in China, and if you go anti-social credit score, doesn't matter how much your bank account is. You are persona non grata. Mm-hmm. And that's the way the system is going. And that's exactly what they want. They want absolute control. And if they have control, that means you don't. It means you have no freedom left. And if you have no freedom left, then what's the purpose? What's your purpose? What's the meaning of life if you don't have the ability to make free choices? And I'm not talking about buying a red dress over a yellow one, or what restaurant you go to, or what movie you see. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about real freedom.
Well, in that vein, David, about thinking how they can affect your freedom. If people are trying to make the choice to, let's say, buy gold or silver, platinum, I know you're a big advocate of as well. Is there a possibility for them to try to make it harder for the average person to get precious metals in this context, if it is seen as a threat against this, whatever the favored fiat currency of the day is?
It is. The problem is that they need it so much for industry, not gold so much, but platinum and silver. So it's really hard to enact rules, which they've done, against bullion and 4 coins or something like that. But it could be done. I really don't know. I mean, anything that resists them, they're going to fight it. They want the total control, total monopoly. And you can't have a total monopoly as long as you allow gold or silver or platinum at some level to be used in a monetary exchange. But if that level is so insignificant, where, it's how many chips do you lose at a casino? I don't know, none maybe, but, maybe one or two fall through the cracks or someone throws them out the door, who knows? My point being is that there's always a slight loss. And so it might be so low that it's less than 1% of the total financial markets. They've got control of 99.99%, so who cares? Mm-hmm. That would be my initial take, because the gold industry is not very big relative to the monetary structure. And the Bitcoin platform is about 1/10 as large as the gold market. So, to think that cryptos are taken over on a grassroots level is a little bit naive. I mean, the way that cryptocurrencies will take over on a global level is because they're implemented by the banking system, not by people saying, hey, I need Monero, works really good. It's anonymous. I like Monero. I'm going to use Monero. That's how I'm going to get through this transition. Well, maybe you individually could, but there's not enough of a base there. And so very trying times, very exciting times, very much times to do some self-examination and look at what really matters. And of course, the older I get, the more it's easy to talk tough because I don't have as many years remaining, but still thinking of my granddaughter, my kids, and all I've worked for, to think that has this fight that I've been on for more than 40 years, we're going to lose? It's not over yet. I don't give up easy, but there's certainly problems ahead, even for the powers that be, to implement what they want. I don't think it's going to be as easily performed. And the last thing we haven't touched on is, what is the possibility of a collapse scenario where it gets out of the hands of banks? That's something that hardly anyone ever talks about. Mm-hmm. But if you go through, like what happened in the 2008 crisis, and Paulson didn't come up with those 2 or 3 sheets of paper and got all the money center banks in there, sat them down at the table and had them sign it, it might be a different world today. Well, the next time that type of thing happens, and it will, what if you got one of these SVB type of bankers at the helm that really doesn't care about how the bank works? All they care about is what pronoun to use. And so there's a delay of a week, and the banks start to close one after the other. The brokerage houses close, or people don't clear. And that's a possibility that's very seldom talked about. Do I see that happening? No. Is it a possibility? Definitely. The problem is, it goes back to the anti-fragile, because these banks are inextricably connected to each other. And so you could have the strongest balance sheet on a money center bank, but your counterparty risk is with JP Morgan, and they are unable to get any more money out of the Fed because the Fed went on vacation. I'm just trying to be funny. But what I'm saying is that it's so complex that it doesn't take a lot of inactivity. In other words, for people to think about it. Let me sit on my hands and think about it. I'll get back to you, Tom. And then, what are you going to do? Well, we're not sure. All right, your bank's closed. Your bank is not in action anymore until you figure it out. So again, that's a bit of a stretch, but you can't rule it out. It cannot be ruled out. And in that scenario, who knows what will come to the fore? I mean, the Chinese Central Bank Digital Currency will still be up and going. That's an internal structure. You'll have, the crypto market will probably still be alive and running. You'll still have barter with gold and silver. You'll still have some of these cryptos that are asset-backed working. But nothing could be worse for the banking system than for a major failure that everyone could recognize to take place that isn't rectified almost immediately. So I want to be clear on that. Well, wait a minute, David. We had Republic, we had SVB, we had all these other banks. They all went down. There are large banks. I think like SVB was like the 30th largest bank in the country or something like that. Anyway, but what happened was, again, the rules got broken. And the rules were you could only bail in. Well, that lasted for about 12 milliseconds, and then they rethought it. Said, no, wait a minute. We're going to have to bail out. In fact, we're not only going to have to bail out, we're going to have to out everybody above 250,000, even though that's not what the law says. Because if we don't, we've got this systemic risk that covers many banks. We'll take them all down. So I don't know, probably sounds too much fear, too much what ifs, but I think it's very important to understand that the CBDC is something probably to be feared, but maybe not to the level that many people do, because these big entities are not as able to adapt into the new system as they might think they can. There's a lot to it. The groundwork's been set. There's no doubt about that. But just because you sign a paper doesn't necessarily mean it actually takes place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it just seems that there's so much in terms of obstacles to getting there, on top of the adoption curve that is, I think there is going to be a good amount of resistance to.
There's going to be a lot of resistance. And this is where these other ones may come to the fore. I mean, I don't know. It's too bad that that the reset couldn't be aligned with the truth, where we have an honest system for everybody, regardless of their social class, mm-hmm. and freedom reigns. But that was tried, seemed to work pretty well for quite some time. And of course, it's been disintegrated at this point. There's really not much left of the principles behind the US dollar anymore. Mm-hmm. It's only been that way for 50 years, thereabouts, when Nixon closed the gold window. Not that it worked perfectly up until, but it's your best choice as far as having a policeman based on the currency, because you can't print gold. Mm-hmm. You can only print currencies. Back to you.
So, David, I've enjoyed this more focused discussion here. And I just want to ask you one last question as we're speaking in the first week of June here, kind of heading into the summer doldrums, as we call them. Do you see anything different this year other than, a quiet summer for the metals, barring any other type of, financial instability, like possibly more banking instability?
Yeah, it's a tough call. I do see it mostly as the summer doldrums. I don't think there's going to be any big upset over the summer. Mm-hmm. I mean, the FedNow starts in July, as we already discussed. Unless there's some big glitches there, I expect that to be approved and coveted by the political and the media. What a great thing it is. And we're one step closer to making a better system for everyone. That's how it'll be sold. But I am concerned with the amount of silver that's left in the registered category at the COMEX. So around 28 million now. It hasn't been that low, except a couple other times in my 25 years of looking at it. But what usually has happened over a few months is more and more silver comes into the registered category, and it's not happening now. Silver market is much tighter than most people realize. Of course, if you listen to the people on the net talking on the retail side, they'll explain quite easily and accurately that the retail side of the silver market is extremely tight. But the silver market's a derivatives market, and it's based upon 1,000-ounce bars, not upon 10-ounce bars, 100-ounce bars or points. It's based on commercial bars. And that doesn't seem to be much of concern to anybody except the silver nuts that watch it so closely. Mm-hmm. But based on price action and the availability of what may be out there, I think it'll be a rather lackluster summer. I do think by the end of this year, though, there's going to be a lot of stuff flying around. And I mean a lot. And so be prepared for that. And brace yourself. Brace yourself for that idea of what we talked about, what price freedom. Get with your innermost self and ask, if I get the new job and I get the whatever, and my career's going fine because I'm working in security software, and security software is very important for the CBDC, and my business takes up all that, and that's good. I wish the best for people, always do. But if that is at the detriment of the future well-being of society at large, you might want to question what your motives are. So, not trying to run anyone's life for them. It's just there's more important things than money. Unfortunately, money is the control mechanism, and unless we could break free from the control mechanism in fits and spurts, a little at a time, a little here, a little there, or just opt out, which some people are doing by choice or not, we have a very, very interesting time ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. Well, David, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap it up for today. I appreciate, as I said, the focused discussion here. Of course, your Twitter feed at silverguru22 and themorganreport.com. You can find all of David's articles and interviews there, right?
That's correct.
Perfect. Thanks so much for your time today, David.
Okay.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.